Alright, had a brief interruption there, but now I'm back. I believe I was just explaining the addition of the drawback leader trait, as opposed to in the base game, each leader simply having two traits which are exclusively advantageous. In this mod, there's also a drawback, which, in addition to expanding the factorial range of options, does also create a little bit more flavor as well. And I believe I was just saying that Gustav, the first Vasa here, I think his drawback is not so disadvantageous, and I think he probably has two of the strongest trait combos here. I'll explain these in a little bit more detail in a moment, but I also was just saying that I'm fairly comfortable with Monarch in the base game, but overall this mod is quite a bit harder, so I'm going to take it down to Prince here. For those of you familiar with the base game, a lot of these options will look pretty similar. There are a few mod-specific changes here, though. Protect valuable units. In the base game, the highest strength unit always defends in a stack, but units led by great generals or otherwise designated as valuable will be put in the back, somewhat realistically, I think, so that they don't die on the front lines, which is a little bit implausible. So that option will be selected, and then a lot of mod-specific changes are on by default, but you can turn them off. Like, for instance, if you play as the Italians, you start the game as these sort of proto-Roman Italic peoples, and then as you progress through history, you, depending upon your civic selection as well, you dynamically change to, like, well, I suppose Greece would be a better example. You would change to the Byzantines in the medieval era, and then modern Greece, etc. You can turn that off, but I actually like that feature. It can be a little bit hard to keep track of who's who, but I think it adds to the flavor quite a bit. I will actually explain the rest of these as appropriate over the course of play, but the options as I have them selected are how I want to play. Yeah, okay. And we're going to select the Perfect Mongoose map script. To the best of my knowledge, it seeks to emulate Earth a little bit more authentically with geographic features like extensive deserts like the Great Outback, for instance, or Sahara, whereas these terrain features are a little more granular in other map scripts. This is a little bit more wild and not so cookie cutter, if you will. But admittedly, I don't understand all of its changes as well as I should. I do like the script from what I've seen of it so far, though. Okay, everywhere start cylindrical, we'll break Pangeas. Yep, alright, we're going to play on Prince Gustav the First Vasa as Sweden here. Alright, and if we are not cursed with the dreaded black tile glitch, we will go ahead and begin playing. It's been mostly fixed, but occasionally there is a recurring glitch where the map will appear black. And if that happens, then I'm going to have to restart, but if you're listening to this on YouTube, it hasn't happened. Yeah, I like the presentation and UI changes they made. The background music is actually from the same album as the Baba Yetu original song, the Calling All Dawns by Christopher Tin. So it's kind of spiritually related, I suppose. And these maps with these different texts. well, these papers, I suppose, over the map. It's a nice presentation. Alright, looks like we don't have black terrain. That's good. Okay, for the sake of role-playing, I will go ahead and read a little bit of this. Gustav I Vasa of the Norse tribes. We are financial and politician. Our drawback trait is schemer. As the player, the favorite religion doesn't really matter, but it's Christianity in any case. We'll go over the unique units here in a moment, but the sun rises on the year 4000 BC. Since time immemorial, the Norse people have lived a nomadic life. After years of wandering, they are ready to settle down and found your first city. Swede, your people have vested absolute power in you, trusting that you can build a civilization to stand the test of time. Classic intro for this series. Alright, so the start we have here. Go ahead and turn the volume up just a little bit. Okay. Alright, we have ivory, wine, this looks a little bit food poor, and a bunch of hills. So, I am going to go over our civ just a little bit. Okay. Yeah, I like the changes they made to this, the game encyclopedia, where you can filter only things you've encountered in your game, or specific to the player itself, and now there's a search feature, which is very useful. So we are the Scandinavian Empire, and as you can see, there's a list of 6 different leaders here. In the base game, there was a unique unit and 1 unique building each. They've added that, or excuse me, they've expanded upon that with sometimes multiple unique units and unique buildings, unique improvements, but in addition, there's also a list of distinctive units. Some generic units are not available to certain civilizations, and this models quite well the arcs of power, if you will, across history. For instance, the Mongols have excellent horse archers, but in fact almost game-breakingly good apparently. But beyond that, their litany of units is not so impressive, and so this is one way that the flavor of each civilization can be more authentically modeled historically. So I won't go over all of these, of course, but just to introduce that concept. Same with buildings here, but the unique units have a actual quantity limit as well, which I think is kind of a nice feature. Prevents spamming. I will, just for the sake of role-playing and fun, go ahead and read this whole background description. If you'd like, you can skip it, but I kind of like to get into the flavor of the game. So, for the Scandinavian Empire, the entry states, more properly known as Scandinavians or Norsemen, the Vikings were a group of people from northern Europe who became famous for carrying out a series of raids across the continent between roughly 800 and 1050 AD. The period is sometimes known as the Viking Age, and it was an era of chaos and disruption for large parts of Europe. The Vikings can be classified into 3 main groups. The Danes largely attacked England, the Norwegians visited Scotland, Ireland, and points further west, while the Swedes invaded the river systems of what is now Russia. Although the Vikings usually employed hit-and-run tactics, many of them settled in new communities in the areas they had subjugated, eventually mixing with the local population. And while the Vikings are thought today to be bloodthirsty brigands, they probably acted more often as commercial traders than as warriors. Historians debate the reason why the Vikings suddenly emerged from Scandinavia at the end of the 8th century AD and began preying upon other parts of Europe. Theories include the Vikings were suffering overpopulation caused by better agricultural tools, that the unification of Norway led to an excess of idle warriors, the Vikings were reacting to attempts by the Franks to muscle them out of trade with the East, or that the men went off to raid and pillage out of simple boredom. One particularly interesting theory is that the climate of Europe was warmer during the early Middle Ages, leading to an excess population in Scandinavia and the subsequent Viking colonization of places such as Iceland and Greenland. Whatever the actual reason for their expansion, the Viking drive outward began with the sacking of the important island monastery of Lindisfarne, located off the coast of Britain in 793 AD. England was regularly raided by the Danes in the following decade, and in 865 a major invasion landed in East Anglia. The force was led by several landless Viking kings. In the battles that followed, most of the English kingdoms were defeated, but the state of Wessex under Alfred the Great managed to hold the invaders off. The Vikings settled in Northumbria, and their territory became known as Danella. Most of these Vikings were Danes. Another wave of Vikings landed in England in 947 under the command of Eric Bloodaxe, who managed to capture the city of York. Vikings would largely remain in control of England until the Norman invasion of 1066. And the Normans were themselves the French descendants of Vikings. Scotland and Ireland also experienced a heavy Norwegian Viking presence at this time. A number of important cities were founded by them, including Dublin. Eventually, the Vikings settled down and intermarried with the native Irish. The main target for Viking aggression, however, was France. All throughout the 9th century, the Vikings sailed up and down the Seine River with impunity, sacking French towns and monasteries at their leisure. Finally, the French king Charles the Simple made an agreement with the Viking leader Hrolfgangur in 911, in which Hrolf was granted control over territory in northern France. In exchange, Hrolf and his men agreed to convert to Christianity and become vassals of the French king. Hrolf's name was changed to Rollo, and he became Duke of the province of Normandy, named for the Norsemen who settled in it. Normans retained their martial edge even after conversion to Christianity, and would go on to make a number of important conquests in England, the Mediterranean, and during the Crusades. The exploits of the Viking sailors were the stuff of legend. Viking mariners found their way to Iceland, Greenland, and even Newfoundland in North America, setting up colonies in all of these locations. Viking longboats were both fast and seaworthy, and their shallow drafts allowed them to sail far up the river systems of Europe. The Vikings could strike from the sea and be gone again before the military forces of a kingdom could be marshaled to meet them. In the east, the Swedes traveled down the rivers of modern Russia and founded the state of Kievan Rus, which grew rich off the river trade between the Baltic and the Byzantine Empire. These Vikings also found employment as mercenaries within the Byzantine domains, and their most elite warriors found employment in the Byzantine Varangian Guard. The Viking Age finally came to a close around 1050 AD, as the Vikings were incorporated into Christian Europe and settled down to the less exciting but more stable pursuits of agriculture and fishing. Their reputation as fierce invaders from the sea has endured to this day. So, that gives it a little bit more context, I suppose, for role-playing purposes, if nothing else. I won't, at this time, do the same description of our leader here, Gustav I, but I will go ahead and go over his particular traits. As I said, I think this is possibly the strongest trait combo, although I'm not overwhelmingly familiar with the new traits that were added in this mod. Having sampled a number of leaders and seen different traits at play by the AI as well, I do think this is probably one of the stronger combos here. So financial, as you can see, +1 commerce on plots with 3, and then a production bonus to a lot of relevant infrastructure. Politician, this +2 to diplomatic relations on its own is quite good because diplomacy, as the player in this mod, you really have an uphill battle with diplomacy because by default tech trading has been disabled, so the conventional trading chips of the base game are no longer available, and the AI will make incessant demands that aren't in your interest usually to accede to, so you tend to sour pretty quickly in your relations with the other leaders. So this bonus is either good for delaying that or worthless for it being a lost cause to begin with. I have yet to conclude, but in addition to that, this 50% espionage bonus is pretty incredible on its own, I think. Kind of surprised they didn't nerf this a little bit. As important as espionage is, and then also a production bonus to some relevant buildings. Minus 40% Great General emergence. I don't see this as a big problem. Usually Great Generals spawn pretty quickly in the first place, and units led by them do tend to die. I don't know if the RNG is actually rigged or not, but Great General led units typically don't last too long, so we'll see. I'm not too worried about this drawback trait though. This is an interesting section they added, AI leader personality. For our purposes, as this leader, it's irrelevant because obviously it's led by the human player, but as you encounter different civs later on, this panel of information is useful because it does summarize their behavior in control of the computer, under the control of the computer. So anyway, back to the start here. This looks a little bit food poor, and I don't know if we can really trust this perfect mongoose map script. It should be interesting one way or the other. We have the warrior start, so hopefully we won't die immediately like the scout does, but we're going to be slower, so we'll our initial exploration will be a little bit slower. But this being the Prince difficulty level, hopefully we won't run into anything too insurmountable. I am going to trust settling in place and move. If we move southeast, we won't lift fog here. Which may be a fish, but if it's a fish, we wouldn't be able to get it unless we settle on the wine, which I won't do. So yeah, I'm going to move southeast. Oh, and it didn't even block sight, my bad. There's a fish here. Okay. I'm going to trust in place. And there is no visible food, so almost certainly we have a strategic resource in the BFC. The conventional wisdom is always to go worker first. However, barbarians are really brutal in this mod. It could be argued that going warrior first is not a bad move, given our lack of immediately improvable food. If we went worker first, we would have to research a tech path that would allow us to hook up the elephants and start chopping right away. Yeah. So if we did tool making and then wood cutting, went worker first, we could build a camp here and chop these trees. Oh man, okay. We've almost certainly got uranium, iron, copper, something, because it shouldn't give you a capital with no food bonus. That's actually kind of weird. Okay. We won't even be able to work any of these hills without improvable food, and there's not even irrigated grass to build farms on. Except for this jungle tile, which we would need water pump to remove, which is a mid-game tech. Huh. I am actually going to think about this for a little while, and we will revisit this in the next installment, so hope you enjoyed the introductory video here, and I'm going to sign off. Until next time.